Good afternoon and welcome to Africa Update here on Trust TV. And this week on the program, we're looking at some very pertinent issue that affects us, or how it could actually affect us. To stay with us, we'll be right back. Welcome back to the program. Of course, we're glad to have you join us on this week's episode of Africa Update. I'm your host, Chiamaka Nwafor. Now, U.S. third country deportation deals. U.S. President Donald Trump is deporting migrants to Uganda, Eswatini, South Sudan, and Rwanda. Now, some of these deals have been struck for the deportees and Africans themselves. That's what the question we're going to be asking. What does this mean for deportees and Africans themselves? Now, a brief context to what's happening. Many of these countries, Uganda, Rwanda, Eswatini, are quite heavily aid dependent. Now, Uganda, for example, hosts one of the world's largest refugee populations and relies on United States funding for HIV/AIDS programs. Accepting deportees could be seen as a way to secure or expand U.S. assistance. Of course, taking into effect that the president stopped some of the things that were happening before, like USAID. Now, Rwanda's past deal with Britain on migrants included hundreds of millions in development aid, raising suspicions that similar financial support is involved with the U.S. agreement. Now, Eswatini is thought to be motivated by the promise of trade deals or financial incentives, though details remain unclear. Now, some government hope cooperation will lead to the lifting of U.S. sanctions or restrictions. South Sudan, after taking deportees, saw certain U.S. visa restrictions lifted and hopes for broader sanctions relief, including an arms embargo. For fragile governments, showing compliance to Washington can be a way to ease international isolation. Now, leaders under pressure at home see alignment with the United States as a way to gain international legitimacy and shore up their regimes. Again, Uganda's Bobi Wine argues President Museveni is desperate for U.S. backing, suggesting the deal helps Museveni maintain Washington's support despite governance concerns. Now, El Salvador's Nayib Bukele, though not African, illustrates this logic. Taking deportees strengthens ties with Trump, who overlooks Bukele's democratic backsliding in exchange for cooperation. Now, there's so much issues here. Rights groups point out that Trump's administration targeted wicked democracies or authoritarian regimes less likely to face domestic pushback. Governments like Eswatini's absolute monarchy may see this as a chance to gain quietly, whether through aid, trade, or reduced criticism of their rights records. Now, over here in the West African part of things, Nigeria blatantly said, no, we're not going to have people being deported to us. But our neighbors in Ghana, just recently, earlier this week, have accepted to have these deportees. However, the President, John Mahama, has insisted it has to be only deportees of West African descent. That's what he's insisting. And so far, from what we've heard so far, the first group under this deal had 14 deportees, mostly Nigerians, plus one Gambian, and Ghana has already received them. Ghana's president said it was approached by the U.S. and Ghana has agreed under the basis that West African nationals don't require visas to enter Ghana under the ECOWAS protocol. So accepting them is consistent with regional agreements. I think he's found a way around the situation. Now, joining me in the studio to further discuss this and help us understand what this would mean for us as a continent and the whole geopolitics about it is Professor Mukhtar Imam. He's a professor of international relations. Thank you for joining us on the program.
Thank you.
Okay, so you've heard me reel out all that information, all that numbers. First of all, when I first saw the story about deportees of non-African descent being deported to African countries, I wondered first, why are their countries not taking them? But then there's something called the third country deportation, where, your native land won't take you, but you can be deported somewhere else. Is this... I know it's allowed, but, in a sense, does it really, is it, I think the word I'm looking for is healthy?
Well, the healthiness of this will depend on the caliber of individuals that are being deported. It will depend on what strata of society they will be falling into. By strata, I mean, in economic term, what segment of labor force or workforce that these individuals are coming. For example, if there are people from the high-end professional cadre, say medical doctors, for example, professionals, engineers, they could lead a helping hand. They could be useful to society. So again, of course, every society must ensure to have the skilled, semi-skilled, and unskilled population. And when these individuals come in, depending on what strata or segment of society they fit into, they could be of use. We've seen situations where asylum seekers, in the name of refugees from Yemen and Syria, found their way into the country. I know a number of them who are in the Northeast, and they have contributed significantly in the area of D8 machines, for example, which is an aspect they have expertise in. They have been able to build a community of working people. I think they are being supervised by the Internally Displaced Person Commission, something. And so they're doing fairly well. That's for that, as far as the healthiness of it is concerned. But the reality is it could go both ways. You don't know exactly the character of these individuals who have been deported, what it is they were involved in. Some of them could have been involved, for all we know, in crimes, drug trafficking, human trafficking, whatever the case may be. That will be adding to the liability we already have across the continent with regards to elements that are hell-bent on creating chaos and catastrophe around. So these are part of the things, but like you rightly mentioned, the legality of it is something we cannot call to question. However, I think what is most pertinent here to note is in the fact that the way the United States president in particular is going about it. As far as the article or charter on migration is concerned at the United Nations, it is something that is worked around. As far as bilateral agreements and multilateral, if you like, is concerned, is something that has been in existence for a while. Countries of origin, countries of transit, and countries of destination, as far as migration is concerned, have always worked together to find a way around these issues. For example, Turkey did it with the EU with regards to irregular migrants going through Turkey into Europe. Of course, it's a very short crossing path. The Turkish government was involved in some kind of arrangement with the EU, where EU countries are finding themselves strained by budgetary cut and inflationary issues and so on. And they decided to come together as a bloc and had a conversation with Turkey to say, all right, we're going to incentivize. We give you some money, keep these guys, ensure that you provide for them a healthy working environment, but they should be in your country because we can no longer absorb refugees and so on. So these things have been going on from time immemorial. However, like I said, the way and manner in which Trump is handling it, because he's a transactional guy, because he appears to sometimes bully his way through whatever he wants done, it makes it seem as though these countries that are receiving these irregular migrants or whatever terminology is used are being coerced, are being forced. It appears they do not have a say in all of this stuff.
Really, but we had a say in our country, and we said we were not going to be doing that. However, I want to believe that that does not apply to deportees of Nigerian descent. If they were deportees of Nigerian descent, they were going to allow them coming into the country, obviously.
Well, some of the deportees that are being returned into West Africa are going to Ghana. So the question is, what happened to Nigeria? However, the bigger picture is this, that coercion or force or compelling doesn't necessarily mean you physically, getting, strangulating an individual or a state and so on. It could be through whatever other means. For example, stifling economies, for example, tariffs, for example. These are some of the things that incentivizes. So where you're not having, a mutual conversation or a conversation that is mutually beneficial, obviously there's an element of coercion in that. And this is what we see with most other African countries. Nigeria is a well-to-do economy. It is doing fairly well, for itself, on paper, at least. So I think we have the shock absorber to be able to say to Trump, no, we're not taking this guy. And
Okay, so now you said something, and would take me to a question. Is it safe to say that this African governments are effectively trading humans for aid?
I think that's a very harsh way to put it. It has an element of that. But you see, the truth of the matter is, in diplomatic bargaining, these transactional things can every now and then appear to be that way. You know, we can as well say that the export of medical doctors from this continent to Europe is also a way of doing the same thing that you have just, the same picture you have just painted. I do not think it is totally, or it could be totally perceived from that paradigm, largely because these individuals are being deported, and naturally it's because they're irregular migrants. They're not documented, sort of, and that's the reason why they have been found to be worthy of being deported, or unworthy, and therefore they're being deported. So you'd have to come to the conclusion that they did something that wasn't right, and hence this is some kind of reprimand for their action. These countries in Africa been incentivized to take these individuals. For example, the case of Turkey that I painted with the EU is not entirely saying take the money, take these people back. It's just to say, look, use these resources to find a way of opening up the economy for them, creating some kind of environment where they will be able to thrive.
But in this situation over here in Africa, we saw that over in South Sudan, when they accepted this, because South Sudan has already had some people come in already, certain visa restrictions had been lifted up. So it's like do me, I do you, scratch your back, I scratch your back situation that's taking place.
Well, but that's what international politics is about. As a matter of fact, that's what politics is about. There's always going to be that, give and take. There's always going to be all of that in the scenario. But the reason why, again, this is looked at with a lot of coloration is because of the individual involved, because of the antecedents of the individual involved, because this is an individual who has never done anything that has been non-transactional. For him, it has always been transactional. This is an individual, like I said, that likes to bully his way through. So the assumption is it's coming from Trump. It definitely has to have come with some strings attached. And that's the reality of what is happening here. If it were on some, some mutual, understanding of, say, some kind of existing bilateral agreement. For example, Nigeria has a bilateral agreement with Germany in that regard, an existing bilateral agreement. So if you find this happening with Germany in the future, rest assured, it's an agreement that was signed a long time ago.
Oh, so you're saying right now that if Germany ever comes to the place whereby they want to deport people, Nigeria is a port of call.
And they have that conversation with Nigeria, and Nigeria agrees to it. Know that it did not start then. If it happens, because there's currently that conversation ongoing, there's an MOU to be signed in the near future with regards to, I think, migration, power, and a few other elements. The talk is currently ongoing. So it is based on an existing framework or structure that has been entered into by the both governments that is going to happen. So in the event it starts happening in the future, it's not the German chancellor who is muscling Nigeria to take. It is because there is an existing framework or structure or mechanism. In the case of Trump, you will find, and I am very sure, that he doesn't have either on the bilateral or multilateral level any sort of framework existing with most of these countries. All he's doing is, look, I have a chip and I want to bargain, and you sort of have to take it.
We'll get into more of that when we return from this short break. Please stay with us. Welcome back to Africa Update. Now, before the break, Professor Imam was talking about bargaining chips and all that. And the question I'm going to ask is, now that this is happening, how does this reshape the balance of power between United States and, of course, aid-dependent countries, or basically even the African countries generally? Because it seems like most of our countries are aid-dependent, when you look at it in the long run. So how does this reshape the balance of power?
The balance of power... I think the balance of power is becoming very static. Reality is, we have been in this circle for a very long time. We keep talking about a multipolar world order. We keep talking about The reality is that we're still tilting towards a very unipolar world structure. Well, of course, there's the emergence of China, there's Russia on the side, and so on and so forth. But as far as the relationship, this is to your question specifically, between African leaders or Africa and the United States is concerned, I think it's still a slave-master sort of relation. We're still being very dependent on the West, not just the United States, but the entire West. It appears we haven't really been able to pick ourselves up and, find a path or chart a course for ourselves. Even though we see clearly well that the idea of multilateralism, which is what we used to lean towards to, muscle other presidents of the United States, and they looked the other way and ensured that we kept getting the aid. A guy has come to the White House who is ultra-nationalistic in his view, who is saying, look, we don't care about multilateralism, it is America first. The rest of you can go and do whatever you want to do. Go back to your cocoons and fix yourselves. However, in Africa, we're still not waking up to the realization that this is the structure or the pattern of relation that exists between ourselves and the United States, even though the rest of the world has moved on. Multipolarity can be talked about in Singapore. Multipolarity can be talked about in the UAE. That order is existing in their eyes because they're literally working in that direction. However, with us, we're still in that place where we're still donor dependent. The United States calls, we go running. Sochi calls, we go running. FOCA calls, we go running. 50 plus country on this continent. This is what we have repeatedly done to ourselves. And so even in the face of donor fatigue, we're still hoping somehow that we will find some kind of miracle happen and that perchance we will be able to keep getting this aid coming in from the West. But I think it's high time we begin to look in another direction. Because as far as aid is concerned, as far as everything around, being at the receiving end is concerned, we're running short. First, the United States, under President Donald Trump, has pulled out the US aid and other institutions that are giving us aid. Here we are, by January 2026, by the executive order 14115 of Trump, the United States is pulling out of WHO. Yet, you find African leaders talk about patents. I'm talking about the health sector now. Talk about patents. There's something called the PABS structure at the WHO that says there will be equal distribution of patents and the whole world will have these things. But the United States is pulling out of WHO. That should tell us that we should not be so optimistic about us receiving patents. Say, for example, there's an epidemic tomorrow or next tomorrow. What is our fate? Why don't we come back home, seek homegrown solutions, and find the way out of the quagmire that we're in from within, rather than constantly wait for aid to come? Because this is exactly what is playing out as far as this bargaining chip that I tried to talk about earlier is concerned. Trump is leveraging on the fact that these guys are still donor dependent. Therefore, I will play that card and I will ensure that I continue to pull the strings.
Okay, so could we say that this could signal to a transactional foreign policy? Because it's seeming like, if he does this and somebody gets away with it, someone else is going to think, okay, I could do this. And then if you want something, I know that it's transactional on a good day, but, it seems like where maybe we'll get the brunt, of it all, and not so much to leave the table with.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's the reason why the scramble for Africa has been talked about. We are a pie on the table. We're just literally been getting dissected, and everybody's just going away with a part of us. And here we are. There's a new scramble for Africa 2.0 happening right now, right before our eyes, in this age, in this day and age. Yet our leaders are still so docile and failing to realize or waking up to the realization that this is actually happening right before our eyes. So I don't know. I just hope that somehow the leadership wakes up and understand that we need to begin to meet these guys as kings meeting kings, rather than go cap in hand begging consistently.
All right. Now, some people have termed this refugee deportation situation into neo-colonial dumping. I don't know if that's an appropriate word. Do you think that's an appropriate word to term this situation? Because now some of these people are not Africans. That's what worries me, really. And some of them actually have criminal pasts. They are actually criminals from, certain parts of the world, and they're being sent over here because their own countries have refused to receive them. So is this some sort of neo-colonial dumping?
But as for the groupings of individuals who are from other parts of the world, because obviously the reports is mixed, we have people even from Nigeria who have been deported. But as far as that grouping of individual is concerned, I think what you have termed it to be is what it is. You see, the truth of the matter is, under normal circumstances, because this is not a normal circumstance, you would want to ask yourself, would these have been the case? Would we have accepted? Would Ghana have accepted? Would South Sudan have accepted under normal circumstances? Let's flip the scene and say Nigeria is now asking South Africa, take some people who have come here from XYZ country and we want you to keep them. Or that Nigeria is reversing the arrangement with Germany, for example, and saying, Germany, we want to take some of our people here and bring them. We're deporting them. We're not sending you expatriates. We're not sending you medical doctors. We are bringing some deportees to you who may have questionable past. Do you think that accepting that would have been the case? Commonsensically, no. It is an absolute no. So, yes, of course, this is what we're seeing playing out. Is this some new colonial tool that is being used to muscle and consistently put the African continent in the position of subservience, in the position of servitude, and to constantly go back and crawl back to them begging? And again, like I said, the irony of it is that our leadership haven't really come to the full realization of what is happening right before their very eyes. If they had, then there is no way the fastest growing economies and the largest markets will be in a room having a conversation and Nigeria will be out there. I'm talking about BRICS. So we need to begin to seek alternatives.
Okay. Now, I'm going to ask you something because you brought BRICS into the conversation. And we saw when we joined BRICS earlier in the year, we saw what Trump did, how he reacted to that and put on some tariffs. But I'm going to go to the G20 summit. It's coming up in December. And I'm going to ask for your take on it. And what do you expect to see? Or rather, it's coming up in November, rather. What do you expect to see Africa do over there? One of the things that they're asking for is debt restructuring, you know, and all that. One of the things I know that they're asking for. What do you expect Africa to go to? Because we will have just one seat. Africa is on the G20 summit. But what do you expect us to get from that whole meeting? And of course, there's the issue of, will Trump come, you know, seeing as South Africa is hosting?
Well, I'm glad that you laid that foundation, the final base upon which you made your statement. 50 plus countries having one voice or one slot, not one voice, one slot to speak, yet have multiple voices. Just create in your mind's eyes, imagine what that scenario would look like. And that's the reason why we have been unable to find a permanent seat at the Security Council of the United Nations. So drawing from the United Nations scenario, it's very clear that we're going to have contradictory and conflicting voices echoing and re-echoing in the chamber of the G20 summit. This is exactly what we'll be seeing. And by the way, it is not a fair relationship. That's not a fair, you know, a balanced place for us to have a conversation. You can't come as Africa, whether as Africa or South Africa or as Nigeria, and you want to bargain with these great powers. You're not at par with them. So essentially, the reality is that we will continue to be in this position where we play second fiddle until and unless we come back and have the conversation amongst ourselves. It shouldn't be about what is our business with G20 when we're D. We are developing, so let's come back and have a conversation as the Ds.
Okay, I don't know. I don't know why you're putting down the beautiful African continent by saying that we're D, but you know, I think
those are not my words.
Okay. I think that we're actually a state somewhere, and that we could, come together and have a proper conversation. But that's it, all the program today. Thank you so much, Professor Imam, for joining us, sharing your insights on the whole third country deportation and its implications for Africa. It's been a pleasure having you on the program.
The pleasure's mine. And
that was it for Africa Update this afternoon. That's the much we have for you. For more of our programs, documentaries, and news, do watch us on our social media platforms and on our YouTube live stream. I've been your host today, Chiamaka Nwafor. Same time, same place. Next week, bye for now.